Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I finally bought my dream property, a beautiful 5-acre lot just outside town after working in the city for 15 years. The previous owners hadn't taken care of it, so it was overgrown and messy. Since I like doing things myself, I chose to clean it up instead of hiring help. I'd spent months researching the best equipment for the job. The wood chipper was my latest purchase, a beautiful piece of machinery that I was probably a bit too excited about. My wife kept telling me to be careful with it, but you know how it goes. You get comfortable with a tool, and that's usually when accidents happen. That fateful morning, I was clearing some brush near the old shed. The work was going great and I was making good progress. Then, in a moment of pure stupidity, I reached too close to the feeder while pushing in a particularly stubborn branch. 1 second of distraction was all it took. The machine caught my glove, and before I knew what was happening, the tip of my index finger was gone. I immediately called emergency services. The dispatcher was incredibly helpful, and the emergency responders arrived within minutes. They did a great job wrapping up my hand, and off to the emergency room we went. The emergency room doctor examined my hand and told me that this was beyond what they could handle there. He explained that I would need to see an orthopedic surgeon. After getting my hand rewrapped by a nurse, I was sent across town to the orthopedic surgeon's office. The surgeon examined my injury and told me that they would need to operate first thing tomorrow morning. He then instructed me to head up to physical therapy to get my hand wrapped properly. I thought it was odd that he didn't just have someone wrap it there, but I didn't question it. I made my way upstairs to the physical therapy department, where I found myself in a crowded waiting room. At the registration window, I explained to the receptionist that the surgeon had sent me up to get my wound rewrapped. The receptionist simply handed me some forms and told me to take a seat, saying they would get to me as soon as possible. I sat there for almost half an hour, blood slowly seeping through the towel wrapped around my hand. Around me, other patients were doing their regular therapy sessions. Important work, yes, but none of them were actively bleeding. Finally, I couldn't wait any longer and went back to the window. I approached the desk apologetically, explaining that I didn't mean to be one of those patients, but asked how long it would be before someone could see me. The receptionist looked at me like I'd just asked her to give me her firstborn child. She rudely told me that I didn't have an appointment, unlike all the other patients, and that they would fit me in when they could. Then she had the audacity to ask why my therapy was more important than everyone else's. At this point, I had enough. I unwrapped the bloody towel from my hand and held it up, explaining that perhaps my case was more urgent because I was the only one bleeding out in their waiting room. The effect was immediate. Her face went from red to white faster than a traffic light. She practically leaped out of her chair and disappeared into the back. Within seconds, she returned with not one, but 3 physical therapists. The first therapist gasped and asked why nobody had told them about this situation. The receptionist stammered, trying to explain that she hadn't realized the severity. The second therapist quickly directed everyone to get me into room 3. The therapy team was amazing. They cleaned and wrapped my hand properly, apologizing profusely the entire time. The receptionist kept peeking in, looking more mortified with each look. One of the therapists even went to speak with their supervisor about the incident. The supervisor came to see me personally, apologizing for the situation and explaining that this should have been treated as an emergency case. He assured me they would be implementing new protocols to ensure this never happened again. I thanked him and couldn't help but comment that the look on the receptionist's face when she saw my hand was almost worth the wait. Almost. The supervisor actually cracked a smile at that and told me that the receptionist would be undergoing additional training on triage and patient assessment. 6 hours after my initial accident, I was finally able to head home. The surgery the next morning went well, and while I'm down part of a finger, I gained quite a story to tell. The receptionist was transferred to a different department shortly after, and I heard they completely revamped their emergency protocol. The wood chipper is still there, but now I treat it with the respect it deserves. And yes, my wife never lets me forget that she told me to be careful. I've been a swimming instructor for over 15 years, and I've seen my fair share of pool accidents. Most of them were preventable, which is why I always speak up when I notice dangerous behavior around pools. Working with kids has made me especially vigilant about water safety, and I guess that's what got me into this whole mess. I had just moved into my new house about 3 months ago. It's a nice neighborhood, mostly families with kids, and I was happy to see that many homes had pools since I love swimming. What I wasn't happy about was what I witnessed at my next door neighbor's house one Saturday afternoon. I was in my backyard doing some gardening when I heard excited screaming from next door. At first, I thought it was just kids playing, but when I looked up, my heart nearly stopped. There were 3 children, none of them looking older than 10, climbing onto the roof of their house. Their mother was in the backyard, actually encouraging them to jump from the roof into their pool. I called out to her, politely trying to tell her that what they were doing was extremely dangerous. She immediately snapped back, asking if anyone had asked for my opinion. I tried explaining that I was a swimming instructor and that I'd seen terrible accidents happen from much lower heights. I warned her that the kids could seriously hurt themselves. She brushed me off, telling me that her kids had been doing this all summer and knew what they were doing. I watched in horror as one of the kids prepared to jump. I pleaded with her, explaining that they could miss the pool or hit the edge, warning that one wrong move could result in a broken neck. This really set her off. She accused me of calling her a bad mother and told me to mind my own business. I tried to reason with her, starting to explain my years of experience working with children, but she wouldn't let me finish. She stormed over to our shared fence and started yelling about how I thought I knew better than her about raising her kids, and demanded that I go back to my house and keep my stupid advice to myself. I made one last attempt to reason with her, taking a step closer to the fence and trying to explain that I was only concerned about their safety. That's when she reached over the fence and shoved me hard. I lost my balance and fell backward, landing hard on my back. The physical pain wasn't too bad, but seeing those kids still on the roof made me realize I needed to act fast. I pulled out my phone and called emergency services. While waiting, I could hear her still encouraging her kids to show the nosy neighbor how it's done. The police arrived within 10 minutes. The officers first spoke with me and I explained everything: my background as a swimming instructor, what I'd witnessed, and the assault. When they went to speak with Karen, she was still in her backyard. The first officer approached her about the complaint regarding endangering minors. She responded by claiming I was just jealous because her kids were having fun. When the second officer brought up the assault, she openly admitted to pushing me, arguing that I should have kept my mouth shut and minded my own business. The officers interviewed the children, who confirmed they'd been jumping from the roof regularly. They took photos of the scene and made some calls. Within an hour, Karen was being placed in handcuffs while screaming about her rights and how everyone was conspiring against her. Her husband arrived home during all this chaos. He looked mortified when the officers explained the situation. I later learned through other neighbors that Child Protective Services conducted a thorough investigation. They found other instances of dangerous activities that Karen had encouraged, like letting the kids ride in the trunk of her car for fun. The court case was pretty straightforward. Karen was charged with assault and child endangerment. She ended up getting mandatory parenting classes, community service, and probation. The kids still live next door with their dad, but now they take proper swimming lessons at the community center where I teach. Now Karen's only allowed supervised visits and has to take anger management classes along with those parenting courses. I still can't believe she thought I was the bad guy for trying to prevent her kids from becoming a tragic news headline. Being a parent doesn't mean letting your kids do whatever dangerous stunt they want. It means protecting them even when they think you're ruining their fun. I've been a single mom for the past 12 years, working as a paralegal to provide for my daughter. We might not have the latest gadgets or fancy things, but we get by just fine. My daughter is a straight A student, never been in trouble, and we've always taught each other to live honestly. That's why what happened yesterday made my blood boil. It started with a text from my daughter during her third period class. She messaged me frantically explaining that they had pulled her out of class and searched her bag for a stolen iPhone. When I asked her why they would do that, she replied that they claimed it was pinging at our house last night and now it was pinging in her classroom. She told me she was scared and embarrassed. I immediately called the school and demanded to speak with the principal. Instead, I got transferred to the school police officer. The officer explained that they had received a report of a stolen iPhone that was tracked to my residence last night. I told him that was impossible since I was home all night and nobody came by. He insisted that the owners claimed they came to my house. I asked him why my daughter was the only one searched if the phone was supposedly pinging in the entire classroom. The officer cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. He deflected by saying they would ping the device again after this period to determine its location. When I pressed him again about why they only searched my daughter, he vaguely mentioned that they had procedures they follow in these situations. I called him out on their procedures involving targeting one student and lying about the phone's location to justify a search. The next morning, I walked into the school demanding a meeting with the principal. The assistant principal tried to intercept me, attempting to placate me by acknowledging that they understood I was upset. I cut him off, pointing out how they had humiliated my daughter in front of her classmates based on faulty tracking data and a lie about someone coming to my house. The principal invited me into their office. Once inside, they told me that the phone had been found in the boys' locker room, nowhere near my daughter or our home. But I wasn't done. I demanded to know why my daughter was singled out and what made them suspect her specifically. The principal shifted uncomfortably in their chair, vaguely mentioning they had received information. When I pressed about the source, everything clicked. The woman who worked in the front office, let's call her Karen, had a grudge against me since last year's parent-teacher conference, when I called her out for being rude to several parents. Her son was in my daughter's class. I confronted the principal about whether it was their front office staff member who suggested searching my daughter. The principal's face gave away the answer. I pointed out how they had violated my daughter's rights and humiliated her because of a personal vendetta. I then played the recording of my conversation with the school police officer from yesterday, where he admitted they lied about the phone pinging in the classroom. I told them that I had already spoken with my law firm, explaining that while schools have the right to search bags with reasonable suspicion, fabricating evidence to justify a search is illegal. I told them I would be filing a formal complaint with the school board and expected this incident to be thoroughly investigated. The principal's face went pale as they assured me the situation would be handled appropriately. 2 weeks later, Karen was relocated to another school district, and both the principal and school police officer had to undergo additional training on student rights and proper search protocols. My daughter received a formal apology, and the school implemented new guidelines requiring parental notification before any student searches. The boy who actually stole the phone turned out to be Karen's son. He confessed after the whole incident blew up. It wasn't easy growing up with autism, but what made it worse was my younger sister always trying to control my life. Even though she is 2 years younger, she acted like she spoke for me since we were kids. Now, at 26, I'm still dealing with her controlling ways. I remember when I was 13, I had finally made my first real friend at school. We were sitting in the cafeteria talking about our favorite books when my sister walked by. She didn't even hesitate before telling me to shut up, then continued walking to her table. My friend was shocked, but sadly, this was normal behavior for my sister. Whether it was at school, at home, or even at family gatherings, she would constantly try to silence me or speak over me. The worst incident happened during my high school graduation. I was chosen to give a short speech as one of the top students in my class. My sister spent the entire week before trying to convince me to turn it down, claiming I would embarrass myself and the family. When I refused, she tried to speak to my teachers behind my back to have me removed from the speaker list. Thankfully, they didn't take her seriously, and I gave my speech perfectly fine. But that day showed me just how far she would go to control my life. As we grew older, her control tactics evolved. She developed this habit of shaking her head whenever I was about to make a decision, as if she had some divine right to approve or disapprove of my choices. Our parents never really addressed it. Mom especially would always brush it off, as that's just how she is or she's just looking out for you. This past weekend perfectly exemplified why I've grown to dread family gatherings. Our parents invited us to dinner at a restaurant, as we hadn't seen each other in weeks. Initially, everything seemed fine, but then came time to order. When I mentioned wanting to get some appetizers, my dad suggested I get an entree instead so I could take the leftovers home. I was considering it until I noticed my sister doing her signature head shake. When I asked her what her problem was, she claimed I didn't need an entree and shouldn't waste money in food. Our dad had to step in and tell her it wasn't her concern, reminding her that I could order for myself. I ordered the entree anyway, and throughout the meal, my sister kept glaring at me like I had committed some horrible crime. To everyone's surprise, including my own, I finished the entire meal. When the topic of dessert came up, my dad asked if I wanted to take something home. I told him I was full, but he insisted I should take something home and suggested cheesecake. That's when my sister completely lost it. She started ranting about how I was being a spoiled brat and questioned why I needed dessert, accusing me of wasting our father's money. When our dad tried to calm her down by offering to get her dessert too, she only got more furious. She called me a fat pig and a yes woman, claiming I couldn't think for myself. The irony of her calling me a yes woman when she spent years trying to force me to say no to everything wasn't lost on me. I couldn't take it anymore and left the restaurant, despite my parents begging me to stay for coffee afterward. Later that night, my phone was flooded with calls from my parents. My mom's message struck a nerve when she suggested I shouldn't have let my sister get to me, using her familiar excuse about how she is. I finally stood up for myself and told my mom she needed to wake up and see how my sister had been trying to control me my entire life. I blocked my sister's number that night and sent a message to my parents. I explained that while I love them both, I wouldn't be attending any more family events if my sister was there. I told them I was taking a break from her until she got professional help for her obsession with controlling my life, hoping this time apart would give her a chance to focus on her own life instead of mine. The aftermath was pretty satisfying. My parents finally started family therapy sessions, and my sister was diagnosed with controlling personality disorder. The therapist helped my parents understand how their enabling behavior had contributed to the situation. My mom especially had to confront her role in allowing my sister's controlling behavior to escalate over the years. 3 months into therapy, my sister finally reached out through our parents. She had started individual counseling and was beginning to understand the impact of her actions. She sent me a lengthy email acknowledging her behavior and apologizing for years of controlling and belittling me. While I appreciated her apology, I made it clear that rebuilding our relationship would take time and would happen on my terms. For now, I'm enjoying peaceful dinners with my parents twice a month, sister-free. We've actually grown closer as a family without the constant tension my sister brought to every gathering. My dad has become more protective of my independence, and my mom no longer makes excuses for toxic behavior. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.